Greetings, people. Sean Halley here. Now that the new pedals are out in the wild, I need to go out into the wild and talk to some people about them, and that means I need to build a presentation board for the road. And we thought it might be a good idea if I tried to document that process as I'm going through it. It means it'll be a little more homespun than usual and won't look as nice. I'm sure I'll say a lot and probably even use the wrong word occasionally, but please forgive me. Hopefully those of you that don't have a lot of experience building boards will get some tips and tricks and maybe even some best practices to start you off on the right foot. And if you're like me and a grizzled road veteran, maybe you'll get a nugget or two of knowledge from me because I've made a lot of mistakes over the years and had to learn from them. So here's what we're going to cover in the video. For one, what is the purpose of the board? Are you building a board for just a little bit, or are you building something that you're going to leave together for 6 months or a year? What do you need to accomplish sonically? What pedals should you consider including? Are you going to be going direct to front of house or to a recorder or something like that? Or are you going to be interfacing with a head and a cabinet or a combo amp? And does that amp have an effects loop or not? What size and type of board do I need? Do you need the sort of slatted pedal train kind of thing where the cables can go through the top? Or do you need a flat board where the power supply is on top with the pedals because that changes how much room you have? Or do you need something like West Coast pedal boards or a trailer trash or something like that where it's angled and you've got room to stick a bunch of stuff up underneath the top deck? Also, basically, based upon the pedals that I've chosen, what is the best order? What do I need to accomplish signal chain wise to get the best out of this group of pedals that I've got? Pedal layout, can you reach everything? Can your foot actually touch all the foot switches that it's supposed to be able to touch, or all the switches sort of grouped together so closely that you actually can't control anything? That's a problem when you get out into the field of battle and you can't actually control stuff. Do all the pedals, once they're connected, actually fit on the board? And heaven help you, is there a case for this pedal board, and do they actually fit in the case once they're connected? I've made that mistake way too many times where I figure it's perfect and then I realize that I've gone over a ½ inch over what it will actually fit in the case. So these are all concerns that I've had over the years. In terms of Velcro concerns, so we're going to attach these pedals to the board. Do we need to use like cloth, kind of traditional old school Velcro, or do we need to use something more powerful and pro-ish like 3M Dual Lock? And if I'm going to use Dual Lock, then I'm going to use black or clear. Ooh, didn't see that one coming. And then also wiring concerns. Am I going to be using custom cables for these or off-the-shelf cables? In some ways, this relates back to how long that board's going to be together. If you've got a bunch of really nice cables that are maybe 4 inches too long, do you really want to cut those for 2 weeks? Maybe not. Also, do the ends need to be right angle or straight? And that accounts also for TRS, 1/4 inch, and also MIDI. And then finally, how does it sound? Does it sound right? So we're going to solder stuff. We're going to talk about whether or not you need expression pedals or volume pedals or any of that kind of stuff. And it's going to be fun. I don't know if this will be multi-episode or not. I have no idea yet. We'll get there when we get there. But for now, we should probably switch the camera angle so I can show you the gear that I actually have to bring along for this presentation. So this is what I have to take. It is a pile of stuff. And as a result, you can tell that it's not going to fit all on one pedal board if I'm not shifting this. Remember, this is going in my luggage. So I got to figure out a way to make the best of this setup and make sure that it's something I can transport in my luggage. And that means that these guys are going to be separate. So this is a separate little board. There's an O-high power supply under this, already pre-wired up. And this is going to be on the floor. And all of this stuff here is going to be on the table. It's probably 4 feet off the ground or something to make it easier for the overhead camera to see for these presentations that I'm doing. So I'm not necessarily concerned so much about my feet for this thing, right? I'm not really worried about that because I can't reach the top of a 4-foot table with I'm not that flexible anymore. That's just not possible. So I'm going to be using my hands for all these things. And on the floor is going to be these pedals to be able to change drive sounds and the 2 mission expression pedals. So those are Aero, normal 25K TRS expression pedals. They're my favorite. I love them. They're light. They're bulletproof. Wonderful. Other third-party gear here, we've got the Morningstar MC6, which works great. And I've got a Strobostomp HD because I'm a Buzz Feiten tuning system guy. And I always like to have something that gives me a strobe tuner. These are I have 2 or 3 of the old ones, and this one's just nice and new and compact. I just got it. And the other pedal that's not something that we make is this one over here, Giggity. And that's basically a mastering pedal. It's on here. I put it on a board sometimes when I know I'm going to be running into a front of house thing without a real amplifier. And I need some more sort of low mid support. So depending on what's coming out of the floor wedge, sometimes it can be very hard for me to play. I had an injury in February where I hurt, snapped something in my palm on my left hand, and so my 3rd and 4th fingers are pretty weak right now. And so I don't want to sound like an 8-year-old playing guitar. And so if I don't hear anything that I like, if I need some more support, I can turn that on and give myself a little bit more girth so it feels a bit more like I've got a big amp firing away, and I can let those poor guys out front deal with the low mids. Now, as I just mentioned, I am going to be going direct with these because I've got an Iridium, of course. So I'm not going to be interfacing with a real amp. If you were going to be interfacing with a real amp and it had an effects loop, it might change how you think about wiring up a board. For instance, if Iridium wasn't here and I was going to be using all of this stuff with a real amp, I would probably think about the stuff that I wanted to be in front of the preamp and then the stuff that I wanted to be in the effects loop. So for me, traditionally, I like to have all of my drive stuff in front of the amp and most of the time-based stuff after the preamp, so that any distortion that is actually in the preamp doesn't affect the delay repeats or the reverbs. That usually doesn't sound very nice, to me anyway. So I usually put all of this stuff, the time-based stuff, after the preamp, and anything that I want to be able to have the preamp effect, sometimes that's a univibe, sometimes that's a saturator or a distortion pedal. So you can see that I've got compressor, amp simulator, drive section, sort of class A gain here, and then a classic distortion pedal times 6 here. And I've also got the deco, the new deco, in front as well, so that I can use the saturation in front of the preamp. So if you were using a real amplifier and it had an effects loop, I would say all this stuff to here in front of the amp, and then effects send to the next thing in the chain through all these guys, effects return out of that last pedal back into your amp. But because I'm using Iridium, I'm going to basically run like this. So I'm going to run all this stuff into the front of Iridium, and then after Iridium comes all this other stuff, and it goes out stereo to the front of house. Now, the other concern that's important in this kind of thing is to remember that I'm actually going to be running stereo once I hit here. All this other stuff is mono, but once I hit here, I want it to remain stereo. And you know what that means? That means I've got 2 outputs here, 1 TRS stereo input there, 2 outputs there, 1 TRS stereo input there. That's a lot of TRS-to-dual-TS cables, and unfortunately, normally they stick out really, really long, right? Now, I'm going to be using a 22-inch by 12.5-inch board, which means that it would be very difficult to fit all this stuff on it if I wasn't using custom cabling. So I'm actually going to have to make custom cables for this, and I will talk about that in a minute. But first, let me show you the board that I'm going to use. So that is an old school Pedal Train Classic 1. As you can see, it's not huge. It's 22 by 12.5, which might be big for some people, but for all the gear that I'm talking about trying to get on this thing, it's going to be tight. Now, this is where Strymon pedals really come in handy, people. So if you think about other pedal manufacturers, the jacks are usually on the sides of the pedals, which means that you need a certain amount of room on each side to be able to fit the connectors. However, Strymon pedals are pretty much the exact same size, and all of the connectors are on the back, which means that I can fit 8 pedals plus a Morningstar and 2 Conduit MIDI interfaces on this board, which is pretty nuts. Now, one concern I'm going to have is that the Zuma, which is, by the way, if you've never tried a power supplies, they're stupid. I mean, it's so freaking good and so quiet, just amazing. But this traditionally doesn't fit under the Classic 1. It does stick out a little bit. So it's going to look like that, right? But it's okay because I'm not going to be stepping on this. This is going to go up on a table just to allow a camera to let me see it. So for this build, I'm not going to worry about the fact that it does raise the back of the pedal board a little bit to have this thing underneath. It's going to be fine. It only raises it by less than 1/4 of an inch. It's not a big deal. And I'm not actually going to be standing on it, so it doesn't bother me. But it would be a concern perhaps if you were going to be stepping on it a long time. But then maybe the thing to do would be to add extra risers here, and then you don't have a problem. Okay, so we have to start thinking about how we lay these things out. So I'm going to get rid of these guys and get rid of the pedals for a second so we can just concentrate on everything that's going on to the board. So for me, I know in terms of the pedals that I need, we just released 6 new pedals, so I got to have those. So in terms of, for me, the pedals that I need to include are at least these guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, wait, these guys. Okay, so those are, okay. Those are the 6 new pedals that I need, right? I know that I need those because I'm gonna go show these. I know that I'm going direct. So that means I need my amp simulator. I need Iridium there. And also, because Zelza is still fairly new, and we haven't had a chance to really talk about it a lot, I want to make sure that's going there too. But if you were playing let's say you're playing a country gig, maybe what you really need is amp simulator, compressor, distortion pedal, 2 delays, and a verb. Maybe that's what you need, you know? So it's important to remember that anything that goes in front of the amp, any signal that comes in front of the amp is going to be affected by the drive that you have set up in the amp. So if I have this set to kind of a plexi-ish kind of sound and I have a fair amount of crunch in there, anything I send into that is going to get crunched. So sometimes we like that sound for short delays, like slapdash delays, which sound pretty nice when there's a little bit of grit on them. But sometimes, for really big reverbs and things like that, I don't want those crunched up by the preamp. I want those basically after the preamp so that anything I swell into a reverb, for instance, comes out finished, almost like a Mr. Mr. kind of thing. So it's important that you think about the pedal order in terms of, all right, what needs to go in front of the amp, what needs to go after the amp, and also what is going to change my mono to stereo situation here. So for instance, at the moment, I've got Deco, which is a stereo pedal, going into Iridium, which is cool. So stereo into stereo, and Iridium is actually a dedicated true stereo in and out amp simulator, so it's awesome. And then I've got stereo for Flint, stereo for Lex, stereo for Zelza, stereo for El Cap, Dig, and Blue Sky, all stereo. However, it may very well be that if you knew, for instance, now this is my board that goes on the floor, and this is my pre-board. These are all mono, 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 and mono. So I don't have to worry about that stuff. I can send a single cable to the input of the Deco, set it to mono in with the new switch, right? Mono stereo in, right? There you go. And now all of my signal chain is exactly the way I need it. However, if you wanted to, for instance, have a mono pedal in the middle of the signal chain somewhere, you have to remember that if you're sending something stereo to it, once it reaches that pedal, it's now mono again, and you have to re-stereoize it later. So if I wanted to have my repeats in stereo on Deco, flicking to left and right, and I had Lex on, Lex does, because of how complex the algorithms are, Lex does sum the inputs to mono before it sends them through the rotational speaker algorithm, because it is so complex, it is so intensive processing-wise to do all the horns and the tub and the tube preamp and the saturation and all that stuff. In order to make this true stereo in and out, we'd have to double the processor and re-engineer it, and it probably wouldn't even sound like a real Leslie anymore because you'd have all these phase anomalies and weird sort of clashing going on. It probably wouldn't even really sound right. So for instance, if this is on, I have to remember that it's going to monoize any of these guys. So it's important to remember how this stuff works. But once you get it all set up, it's completely rad. All right, so let's talk about the magic and the heartbreak that is Velcro. So we need to attach these pedals to the pedal board somehow, and traditionally, most people use one of 2 products. Either the traditional cloth hook and loop Velcro that you get. Oftentimes when you buy a pedal board, you'll get 2 rolls, one's sort of soft and one's prickly, and when you put them together, they create a bond and they hold things pretty fast. For me personally, I would say the only time I would use that product for me is if I have a very small amount of pedals, so there's not a lot of weight, or if it's always going to be absolutely 100% under my control. No one else is going to carry it, no one else is going to bump it. it's going from my car to the gig and back without anyone ever touching it. That's about the only time I would traditionally, personally, use that product. Otherwise, I traditionally use something called 3M Dual Lock, which is my favorite. It's a much more professional, more permanent kind of a bond. When you stick it together, they're really stuck together, and usually you have to have a screwdriver to be able to pry them up off the board, and that is my preference. Now, you can also use a combination of the two. So my friend Michael Thompson is one of the top session guitar players of all time. As I mentioned him earlier, when he has a gig for Celine or somebody, he puts together a custom pedal board for just that job. So he picks all the pedals out of his vast collection to make the noises that he needs for that gig, and then he builds a board. And he builds it pretty interestingly. He builds it like on multiple levels. Like it's not just one flat layer of pedals. It's like stuff stacked like a little small cityscape or something like that. It's completely nuts. And so oftentimes he will use a combination of either regular Velcro or dual lock and nylon zip ties, because this board, even though it's custom made for this gig, it's not always going to be under his control, and definitely will be in the control of the TSA every once in a while. So traditionally he will actually zip tie them together as well as using Velcro. So it depends on your situation. If you need absolute balls to the wall, absolute perfect, never a worry in the world, use both. But traditionally you can get away with using dual lock and it's completely fine. Now, I mentioned in the intro, there's a difference between dual lock. There is, at least in the Form 250, I believe, is the stuff that I normally use. You can see here I've got two different kinds. I've got black and clear. And I mentioned before that you have to choose which one that you want to use. Some of it is visual, but for me, actually, I prefer the clear, and I'll tell you why. When you mount clear, there it is. By the way, if you have dogs, you'll never get the hair out of your Velcro. Just don't even bother trying. I have two dogs. I can try anything in the world, and there's always going to be dog hair and everything. So I'm sure that you will see the stray dog hair in this video. I apologize in advance if that kind of thing bums you out, but get a dog, you'll see. Anyway, so Velcro. One of the reasons why I like the clear stuff is when you put it onto something, and I'll show you this in a second, it's easier to tell when you've got full contact with the entire adhesive onto the product. So when I cut this and put it on the first pedal, and I'm going to show this to you, when you first put it on, it might look like, hey, it looks really well, it looks really nicely bonded. But if you push it and squeeze it around, and what I always suggest you do anytime you're using Velcro or anything with an adhesive is, move it around a little bit as you're pushing it on something, so that you're really just getting the adhesive into all those little nooks and crannies on the pedal. But you'll be able to tell when you fully make a bond because it actually changes color. And you can see that it's actually a solid, almost grayish color behind it because it's fully touching the pedal. So I'm going to trim this real quick. We're going to talk about this in a second. I'm going to trim this real quick and then you can see what I'm talking about. So let's talk about actually mounting the pedals on the board. As you can see here on this board, I've got the Velcro on basically most of the entire surface of the board. Now, when I was younger, and by that I mean way mo-po, and ramen was still the main staple of my diet, I did it sort of the opposite way. I would just use enough, basically, Velcro to be able to just attach the pedal to. And so I had all these gaps all over the board because I was only using exactly to the millimeter the amount of Velcro that I needed. But these days, I must say that I traditionally pretty much do this as a way to make sure that no matter what I have to attach, there's always a place for the actual Velcro to go. And actually, I would normally even do these parts here on the side. I got this board from an old pal years ago, so I didn't actually put this stuff on, but this is the same way I would do it, only traditionally I would put them here too. Now, that means that when you're attaching a pedal to this, the best thing to do is to basically run the strips up the pedal this way, right? So that way. So I'd have two vertical ones matching with two horizontal ones, meaning it's going to make a really nice simple and solid connection between the two things. So that would be my suggestion, is basically, cover most of the board as much as you can in the, if you're using the cloth version, whatever the female or male version of that connector is. If you're using dual lock, it's all the same stuff, so it just mates together. But here's the trick with dual lock, and this is actually something that is a really important trick to know. You can certainly take a pedal like this that is already got stuff on it. So I obviously did not put the Velcro on this pedal the same way, because when I first mounted it, I mounted it onto a different board. But, you know, if you got Velcro on it, or you put it in there, as I mentioned, dual lock will not let that thing go. And it is unlikely, okay, I can get it off. I can get it off, but traditionally it requires a screwdriver. However, if I had put down pieces of the dual lock first, and then mated them together and trimmed this, so it was just one piece, and left the adhesive side up, which I can certainly do, if I had done that, it would actually be even more solid, because you've perfectly mated all of these teeth together. So you trim it to size. So one of the ways you can do it, ooh, yeah, that's gonna be tough to get out. One of the ways you do it is you trim it to size. So you go, okay, cool. It needs to be 2 pieces that are that long, trim it to size, and then put them down on top of here and mate them, take off the adhesive, and then set the pedal down and twist it a bit to make sure that you really see the adhesive. And once you do that, I promise you, that pedal ain't going anywhere until you bring out a screwdriver to get it off. Because once these are perfectly mounted, it is way more difficult to get them off than if you just took one that already has stuff on it and do that. You can tell how solid that connection is. That is not a wimpy connection. It's very powerful. All right, so let's mount Flint to the board first, and it's gonna go over here, towards the end. So the first thing I need to do is make sure that I have the exact right length of stuff. So I'm gonna say that that's about there. And of course, I set up to do a pedal board video and don't have scissors. That's pretty genius. So I'm gonna use an X-Acto knife. Boy, I don't suggest doing it this way. Anyway, so you got one there, right? One there. Kind of need another one the same size. Like that. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, if you want this to be the most solid way possible, you can do it this way. Put this one here across those things and mate it. Get it all down there perfectly. And let's see if that one's the right size. You can do that, and let's just see if that's, yep, that totally works. Although we probably want these to go a little bit further down this way. Yeah, there we go. And this guy can come down a little bit like that. Okay, so you can see that those are there. So we'll take off the protective strip like that. I'll walk around to the other side. Make sure that your surface is clean, and then check this out. Put it down and just do this. As straight as you can. Now twist. Push and twist. There you go. Pushed and twist. And now, I promise you, that is not going anywhere. And to get that off, you're absolutely going to have to use a screwdriver. Okay, so that's kind of, that would be the ideal for adhesion. However, it's unlikely that you will be doing that very many times, because if you do it once, all of a sudden you've got stuff on the bottom of your pedal, right? If you want things to be perfectly butted up against each other as well, like I'm talking about doing, it would be difficult to get that exactly right by doing the technique that I just did, right? So instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through and add Velcro to all these pedals on the side so that I can immediately fit them and have them butt up right next to each other, so I've got as much room as possible on the board. So let's do that. Okay, so I mentioned that there's a reason why I use the clear version as opposed to the black version usually. And that's because if I take off this strip here, I remove the protective strip that's covering the adhesive, and this is 3M stuff, so man, this adhesive is serious. Now check this out, I'm hoping you can see this. But if I put this down here, and I just put this Velcro on, you can see. Okay, cool, it looks like it's on, right? But check this out, if I start squishing it around, down here and pushing it, pushing it. Can you see that the color's different? See? Yeah, you can see it actually, yeah. So this is the stuff that I've pushed and smushed around to make sure that the adhesive is fully on the casing of the pedal. And you can see here, this looks lighter, and that's because it has not been pushed the same amount. And now, when you look at them, you can see they're all, see, that's why I use clear, because I can always tell when that glue adhesive stuff is fully seated to the bottom of the pedal. All right, so let me do all the rest of these pedals and then I'll come back. Well, I've got Velcro on all of these guys now, so why don't I just lay them down? I'll show you how it goes. So next to each other. Bang. Deca was going to be in front. Bang. Blue skies at the end. Down here a bit. Room for the jacks. Go. Dig was probably there. L cap. Zelza. Ooh. And Lex. There you go. Look how clean that is. That is beautiful cleanliness. That is because of the shape and the layout of those pedals. It is just beautiful. So now, once I get the Morningstar on there, which I have, of course, I can go here, but I don't want to put it down yet because I still need to figure out those MIDI interfaces. But now we can start talking about this cabling situation that we're going to need. And the thing is, because I need all of this TRS input and TS outputs, I'm going to build some custom cables that will be very short, because I know I'm always going to be needing to connect these pedals together, right? Obviously I'm a Strymon guy, so I'm going to be using Strymon pedals. So I'm going to show you that some of these cables I can build here. So I'm going to build a pile of these, right? So these are TS on one end, TRS on the other end. And I also need to modify the TRS cables that we get with our conduits to put a right angle connector on them, because I'm going to need that space. But check out how cool this is. So these are two short little TRS guys on a little mini dongle like that, and then a TS. So if you want to go from one to the other, do this. Out. Oh, whoops, crap. See, there you go. Look at the right jacks, dummy. Out. Out. In. Anyway, I'm going to show you how I'm going to make those. And here's what we're going to build. So a TRS-to-dual-TS cable with a balanced 3-conductor wire in between them. And we take all that stuff apart. These are the individual components: one TRS end, 2 TS unbalanced ends, and 2 pieces of 3-conductor wire, one shorter, one longer. And when you split all those out and you strip them, that is basically what you get for one cable. And then if you take all those and you say we're going to build a pile of cables, that's what you get. So basically that is the amount of wire that we're going to need to be able to make all the cables for the audio portion of the pedal board. And here are all the major bits and bobs when you see them together. So you've got the TRS ends there, you got the TS ends there, screws there for all of those caps, and the screws are the same for TRS and TS. So it's easy to find them. You don't have to worry about them being different sizes. I needed a quick way to hold the jack, so I popped 2 holes in a box and stuck them in there. Way easier. These are unbalanced TS connections, so there's only 2 terminals. So the first one is that guy, that's positive, that's the tip, and that is negative, that's the ground. On these jacks, the ground and the case touch each other. So you gotta make sure that the positive doesn't touch the ground or it will short. And if you can't get those darn tabs out of the way, well, just try a piece of painter's tape, and that'll work. That'll give you the ability to actually work and not have those things melt in the solder. Now we have a TRS jack on the left and a TS jack on the right.
So that has, the TS jack only has 2 conductors. So it's got the ground, remember, that touches the case, and then it has the positive lead, which is in the middle, and that's the tip. But on the left-hand side, the TRS jack has 3 conductors. So it's got ground, ring, and tip. And those cannot touch each other. If there's any solder touching those things, it will short, and that is not a good thing. So here's what it looks like when it's done. And you can see that I've got the clear on the ring, and I've got the colored on the tip. And I always do that as a way to remind myself, just in case I get lost, no matter what the color is, I use the colored lead for the tip, for positive. And now we need to do the TS ends. So what I've done is I've taken the short cable and I've joined all of the colored leads together, the clear leads together, and the ground together. And on the left-hand side, I chopped off the colored lead. That's the positive lead from the TRS jack. And on the right-hand side, I still have the colored positive lead. I have the clear lead from the ring of the TRS cable and the joined ground. And what I have to do is I have to take the yellow tip on the right-hand side and run that to the tip of the right-hand jack, and I need to run the clear on the left-hand side and run that to the tip of the left-hand jack, and then the ground is basically shared, so I need to take both grounds and merge them. And here we are done. So the signal from the ring of the TRS input is on the left, and the signal from the tip of the TRS input is on the right. So these are now left and right split, and they're ready to go. And if you look and see what it looks like here, now that's with the clamshells on. It's very nice and clean, and that's plenty of enough room to get into the back of the Strymon pedals. And now we need to test the connections. And here are all of the cables that we built. They are all tested. There's no shorts, so they work great. But I did forget about something. This is the high quality TRS cable that comes with Conduit. And the problem is I don't have the room for that straight end. So I'm going to have to take the straight end. I'm going to have to hack it off and replace it with a right-angled TRS jack. And I went to West Coast Pedalboard and ordered these guys. These little ends here are very small, they're super robust, they're nice, they're high quality. They're not that expensive, and it makes me wish I hadn't just used Amazon ends for all of the audio connections. But hey, there you go. These cables work great as well. They've all been tested, and now we're ready to go back to the other view.
Okay, so we now have our pile of cables. So let's hook them up. Oh, let's see. Stereo out of this guy. Go stereo into that guy. Stereo out of that guy. Stereo into that guy. Now, you want one, so that's amazing. So, for the moment, my job is to say stereo out of this guy. Into stereo in this guy. I'll just turn this out. Round corner. There you go. Cool. And then stereo out of that guy. Stereo out of this guy. Into that guy. Look at my short cable are. That's it. And then stereo out of that guy. Into that guy. And that's a little tight cable. Let's see. That's right. Look at that. Slick, clean, no extra cables anywhere other than whatever the heck's going on here. Well, we'll solve that. Don't worry, we're going to tuck that up underneath. But for now, that looks very clean, and I know, because I've metered them all, that they all work, which is cool. Okay, so the audio is done, so it's all plugged in. We know that's going to work. So the next thing we need to do is hook up the MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. I have heard it pronounced M1D1 once in college at Texas Tech University. And also other people in Texas sometimes say MIDI as well, which is interesting. I think it's MIDI. I really think it's MIDI. It should just let's agree, it's MIDI. In any case, I've got a Morningstar MC6, if you remember, and 2 Conduit interfaces here. So normally, if this board was going to exist for more than a very short while, which I've sort of let you guys know, this is not a long-term board for me, I would probably mount these underneath the board just to get them out of the way, right? I mean, they don't need to be seen. However, the purpose of this board is to show people the gear that we make from an overhead camera and make sure that people understand all the elements in the rig that I'm using. So I'm going to mount these right on the top of the board in a stack like this, right next to the Morningstar. So the MIDI routing will be out of the Morningstar into the in of the bottom conduit, and then out of the bottom conduit into the in of the top conduit, right? And then each pedal gets its own connection to the conduit. So I've got 8 jacks, and I've got 8 pedals. Everyone's going to be MIDI, and it's going to be happy. Now, if you're not familiar with the conduit, it's actually pretty cool. This is actually a 5-in, 5-out MIDI interface. So's that. That's a 5-in, 5-out MIDI interface, or 6 or something like that. But it's a half rack size. This is the exact same thing, basically, in a enclosure the size of a box of Altoids. So it's pretty cool. It's full featured. It has a USB-C connection on it, so you can connect it to a computer as well. Pretty neat, very well thought out, and just ultra compact and killer. So now normally, I would say that in this instance, normally, I think you're fine using a regular, old school MIDI cable with straight ends on this. So you would go out of this one, into that one or something. And I think that's okay. It's not too much space. If you see it, it's not a huge amount of space that you have to account for. However, it's just not sexy. And, I'm not that anal, but heck, I'm taking the time to do this. I might as well actually solder some stuff to make it cool and make it sexy and clean. Check this out. I bought a few of these. Unfortunately, these are unbelievably expensive for what they are, but it is a Nortric or Switchcraft. I don't remember the brand, but it's a normal MIDI connector. However, the interior part can actually be spun 360 degrees. So, depending on the orientation of the jacks that you need, the cable can come out this way or that way or any way you want, because the head of this is geared and it snaps into place when these 2 clamshells come together and stays put. So I can do this, which is gonna just be awesome. Check this out. Come on. How cool is that? That's just rad. I mean, like I said, I'm not really the anal guy, but that's cool. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire some MIDI cables using the same 3-conductor wire that I used for the audio stuff, because I'm going to explain why here in a second. So stick around. I'm going to change the camera angle again. Okay, so first of all, let me just correct something I said a second ago. I was mentioning I was going to use the bottom conduit as the master and then slave the second conduit to it. But if you look at the way I've got this cable here, this is the output, and that would be blocking that. So I'm actually going to use the top one as the master. So no big deal. Just means that MC6 MIDI comes into here, MIDI out of conduit number 1 goes to MIDI in of conduit number 2. Okay, so over here to a MIDI connector. I mentioned a second ago I was going to be using the same 3-conductor cable for the MIDI cables that I did for audio. I'm going to tell you why. Even though there are 5 pins there, MIDI traditionally only uses 3 of those pins. So it is actually pins 2, 4, and 5, which are, let's see if I can, I'm not sure if I can do this. It's the middle 3. That's pin 2, and depending on what you're looking at, that's 4 and 5, depending on which way the connector is going. And I'm not even going to attempt to find out which one it is right now. So what that means is that I only need to connect these 3 pins on each end of the cable to have a MIDI cable properly work. Now, if you have a Voodoo Lab or a Rocktron product that actually uses phantom power on 5 pins, they're actually using these other 2 pins, pin 1 and pin 3, to pass phantom power down to power the unit. So if you've got an amp switcher from Voodoo Lab or Ground Control Pro from Voodoo or a Rocktron anything, MIDI Mate or whatever, although that's 7 pin, it can still do 5. Anyway, point is, traditionally, if you're just running MIDI and you're not trying to do any phantom power or silliness, it is just these 3 pins, the middle 3 pins that you need to connect, and just connect them together and make sure they don't touch the sides, and then we'll test them in a second to make sure they're all good. So let me solder some stuff and then we'll get back to this. Okay, so there we have the first cable finished. Remember when I was talking a second ago and I was saying, hey, it's going to be so sexy, going to be so cool looking and all that kind of stuff? Don't do this. Oh my God, I forgot how much I hate. Look how tiny those pins are. They suck. They suck so bad to wire. Oh, it's awful. Anyway, I've tested this with a meter. It's fine. It's perfect. There's no shorts. But I really wish that I had just bought some right-angled cables and chopped them. This is awful. Anyway, more to come. Okay, so maybe I misspoke a little bit. Second one went fine, actually. I just had to remember how to do it. So you see that those little pins are actually open, they're empty. So my suggestion would be to insert the wire into the empty hole first without tinning it, and then just drop solder on top of it by touching the side of the barrel and touching on the top. As well, I would suggest that you start from the left side, like whatever this pin is. Don't start in the middle, because what can happen is that while you're doing the ground, which is pin 2 in the middle, you might actually drop some solder over top of the open hole here, and then all of a sudden it gets much harder to do. But anyway, so you can see that it's fine, and I've got these things here, so let me just basically go and put these together and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so look at that. So these guys look all nice, and this guy is angled up a little bit to make sure that you can get to the USB and the 9-volt and the expression pedals and all that stuff. So pretty cool. So Morningstar's on the board. Got my conduits with my tasty cables and my dual lock. And actually, because they're dual locked together, you can see, I can still see what the LEDs are doing here, because they're not fully, because there's a little sandwich here. So that's good. And all I have to do now is just say, cool, you go here like that, and then you go like that. And yeah, that's tidy. So now I basically need to hook up all the TRS cables to these guys. Okay, a couple concerns here. It's going to be important that all these pedals are set to their own MIDI channel once they're connected, but let's connect them first. Because I put these things close together and the board is very small, I'm going to have to sort of go around under the bottom. That's not ideal, but like I said, this is really a demonstration board for a camera overhead. Not a big deal. Normally what you'd want to do is make sure that those cables have a easy route to get underneath, so you can get from the back of those to here without having to make it ugly. But I'm going to go underneath. So let me just hook all these up. Then here, right there. That's okay. Yeah, so I guess that's so we'll say Italy, and then the thing is not going to be this way. Cool. That's you. Cool. Next gotta be Hilda. So Hilda. Yep. Next gotta be Cap. Next gotta be. So everyone is now connected. Cool. We'll tie that up in a second. But now we can see that all 8 pedals are connected to the 8 jacks out of our conduit. MIDI out from the Morningstar is going to MIDI in on the top unit. MIDI out from the top unit is going to MIDI in on the bottom unit. So now I need to get the power together, and then we can start setting up the MIDI stuff. So it's kind of time to start talking about the power supply. However, you might be asking yourself, why does he look different? Why is he dressed differently? Well, to answer that question, there is a French term that chefs use called mise en place. And in French, I think it roughly translates to gathering things, but it has come to mean getting all of your ingredients ready before you start a task. So on the line in a restaurant, the chef that's finishing stuff has to have everything in front of him that he needs to finish any dish that comes along his station. He doesn't have time to go grab stuff because things will go cold. So if you're making a stir fry, you know it only takes 6 or 8 minutes to make something, to cook the whole thing. So everything has to be chopped before you start, or else you're screwed, right? So building a pedal board is very similar, and I thought I'd done a pretty good job. I mean, I got all the power supply cables, I got the pedals, I got the dual lock, I got the solder, I got the soldering iron, I got little pincers and tools and things to be able to snip wires. I thought I was doing pretty well. Well, I missed one major glaring thing, and some of you might have actually noticed it earlier on in the video. When I first got the pedal board, I got it from a friend of mine, and it was one of those garage swap kind of things, like, oh, here, you know, take those and take that and give me this. Kind of, it was just, you know, one of those things. And I remember asking at the time, does it have the hole through the back of the pedal board for the power supply inlet? And he was like, yeah, it's underneath the tape. I'm like, oh, no problem. Never looked. It didn't. So I had to, while filming, run downstairs in 108-degree heat yesterday and take 45 minutes to bore a hole through the back of this freaking pedal board. So if anyone ever has any doubt that pedal train boards are robust, don't have a doubt. It took a drill, a grinder with a diamond bit, and finally one of those little reciprocating Dremel saws to finally bore a hole in the back of it. But it's done. It's finally together. I had to rebuild the whole thing to make sure that it actually works, but here it is. Ooh, So check it out. Looks very nice now. See, cool. Yeah, cool. And if I turn it around, it's actually quite heavy now. But if I turn it around, you can see power supply looks nice, right? Wiring looks nice, all clean and whatever. So now we can put this on the floor and start figuring out how we would like to do the MIDI stuff. So it already works, all the cables work, I've tested all that stuff, but now we just need to set things up to where they're listening to the right channels and we're sending them the right messages, and probably need to set up the expression pedals as well. So hopefully I don't have to go down and drill anything. Okay, so you can see that the actual pedals are powered on and working. Conduit is actually blinking at the moment because I have the Morningstar MC6 here connected to my computer so I can do some configuration. So the idea behind this is that I'm going to be running just 6 presets here. I'm just going to make 6. That's all I need to do. Because what I'm really doing here is just loading a paint palette. If you think about it like a painter's palette, I'm just going to load 6 different versions of sort of the combination of things. And when I push the button at first, it'll probably make a nice sound. But the idea is that I'll probably be going back and forth, 6 sounds on each pedal. So what I'm really doing is loading a paint palette and not really creating, perfectly finished sounds, because it's kind of a demo, right? So that means that I'm going to basically create 6 patches here, 30 through 35, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. I'll show you how to do that here in a second. And I also need to consider what channels I put these pedals on. Now, I mentioned before that I would probably set them all to separate channels. Now, if you weren't using expression pedals, you wouldn't have to do that. Meaning, if all I'm sending is program changes, where I'm just saying, hey, just go to preset 30 or go to preset 31, if they're all on the same channel, it's actually fine. It's not a big deal. However, if I sent an expression pedal and I sent it to continuous controller number 17, and everybody was set to channel 1, every control on every pedal that was number 17 would be moved by the pedal. So I don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is set Iridium to channel 2 and set El Cap to channel 6. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier to try to keep things visually, in time for yourself to just kind of make an easy reminder. So in the signal chain, Strymon is the second, Iridium is the second pedal, and El Cap is the 6th pedal. So channel 2 and channel 6, just so I remember if I get confused. And the idea is that one expression pedal is going to be Iridium volume out, so I can do swells of finished tones into delays and modulation. And it's also, the other one is going to be the repeats for El Capistan, so I can do some sort of sound on sound kind of things if I decide that I want to do that. So that's how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go into the computer right now and set up the expression pedals for channel 2 and channel 6 for the right numbers. And I'm also going to set up the 6 patches in the Morningstar. So I'm going to show you how I do that. Okay, so here I am in the Morningstar editor, and you can see that I've got 3 banks here. I'm just going to use the demo bits bank, and I just need 6 presets for myself to make it easy. And you can see that over here on the right, the first 4 have already been made. I made those, and PC just stands for program change, just to make it easy for myself, because these aren't real names for like, lead or wet whale or something. These are just paint palettes I'm loading. So preset number 5, I'm going to call this PC, what's the next one? 34, is program change 34 to make it easy. And all I need to do is say it's a press. And what I want it to do is send a program change, and I want it to send it to all of the MIDI channels, because I'm going to set the pedals that need to be set to different channels, and all of them will get the same message. So we're saying that is going to be program change 34, bang, and save it. There we go. And the last one, program change 35. Oh, not with a, whatever the heck that asterisk was. I'm saying it's 35. Press it, thank you. Program change, all channels, yes, thank you. And this will be program change 35. And there we go. So now that is 6 switches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And whatever I do with the pedals, I can just save that on the pedal. And when I hit the button, all the pedals will change to patch 35 or 34 or 33. Now, for the expression pedals, I've already set these up, but I'll show you how they're working. So you remember that expression pedal 1 was going to be Iridium volume out. So that is going to be set to control change number 12. Minimum value is 0, and the maximum value for this is going to be about 45, because the output of Iridium is quite hot. So I'm going to leave it at 45. That'll be the max, so that I'm not blowing all the way up to full, sort of output and, crushing the converters on whatever I'm feeding in the venues that I'm working in. And then expression pedal 2 is going to be the repeats for El Cap, and so that is CC number 18, minimum value 0, and in this, the maximum value is 127. That is the maximum range of traditional MIDI values, is 0 to 127, and that goes out on MIDI channel 6. Remember correctly, Iridium was on MIDI channel 2. Before I forget, there is one other thing I have to do. So I have to be able to set El Capistan to channel 6, if you recall, from expression pedal 2 down here. And in order to do that, I need to send it a program change on channel 6 when it is waiting for that command. So you can set the pedal to channels 1, 2, and 3 directly on the encoder knob, but for channels 4 through 16, you need to set it to a position where it's listening for a message, and the channel that that message comes in on is what the actual input channel gets set to. So I'm going to set that in a different bank. I'm going to call this, let's see here, I'm going to call this just, Chan 6 message. There we go. Chan 6 message or something, whatever, all good. All right, so that is going to be a action press. I wanted to send a program change, but this time I want it to do only channel 6, and it can be any program change number, so it doesn't matter, whatever. And now that means that if I save that, when I go to bank 4 and I hit that first message, it's going to send a program change on channel 6. So when I'm ready to do that for El Capistan, it's ready. I can set Iridium to channel 2 easily. All right, so let's set these guys up for MIDI. We're going to start with Iridium. So I need to do 2 settings on Iridium to make sure that it works properly. So first one, I'm going to hold down the left foot switch and power it up. And I need to make sure that this guy goes to blue so that the expression pedal jack listens to digital input or MIDI. Cool. Press another button to save it. Now I just need to hold down both, reboot, and now I need to make sure that the drive is turned to amber, which means channel 2. So that's channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, and then this would be channel 4 waiting for input. So we're going to say channel 2 for amber, bang, done. So let's move on to El Cap. I need to remember how to do that. Hang on. Okay, we'll set El Capistan. Luckily, we can do both settings on El Capistan with just one power-up mode, so we don't have to do it twice. So we can just unpower, hold the left, power up, and we have 2 settings to make. This guy needs to be on MIDI or digital, so that needs to go to blue. And this guy needs to change the channel, not 1, not 2, not 3, but it needs to be 4. So it's listening for a PC message. And now remember up here, bank 4, channel 6. There it is. And if I push that, whank, it received a message, and now that is on channel 6 and it's ready to receive MIDI. So now my 2 expression pedals will work. Sweet. Let's plug it in and see if it works. So we are all set up here. I've got the guitar plugged right into the deco. I don't have the mini board plugged in yet just because I want to make sure this all works first before I add levels of complexity. So this pedal is Iridium volume. You can see right there it says Iridium volume, and that pedal is El Cap repeats, which is cool. So theoretically there should be nothing now, but if I turn it up, never listen to someone when they're just playing sounds. It's always awful. And if I want long repeats out of El Cap, so it works. Cool. It's time to incorporate the other pedals. All right, so it's now all together. It's all working. I'll give you some examples of some sounds here in a minute, but I wanted to button up the thing about the power supplies. So there is a Zuma underneath the big guy, and that has enough taps for pretty much all the pedals and the Morningstar, but it didn't have enough taps, obviously, for the 2 conduits. So because these 3 guys have very low current consumption because they're not passing in the audio and because they're not in the audio path, I've actually got these all on a combined cable. So it's a jumper cable basically. So it's 1 in, 4 out. So I've got 1 extra tap if I ever needed to add anything here, but all of these pedals are running on individual taps on Zuma, and then these 3 guys are running off of 1 single tap. And then underneath this little guy is an O-hi. And when I'm doing the demos out on the road, because this is going to be on a table far away, I won't be able to do this. But right now I've just got it tapped off of the 24 volts out of the Zuma right to the O-hi. So if I was actually on stage and this was sitting to the left or to the right like it normally would, I could actually build a little cable just to make sure it's long enough to get all the way from Zuma to O-hi and just have 1 power cable for the whole thing, which is cool. Now, about the actual power cables for the pedals themselves. These are just the same things that come with your Zuma or your O-hi when you buy them. And I don't traditionally wire those myself. And it's because I don't screw around with stuff with molded ends. I just, you know, if I ever have to adjust this, I just cut it somewhere in the middle of the thing and splice it with some nice tape. I'm not going to be trying to do this kind of stuff. And I just realized while making the MIDI cables that my eyesight has really gone downhill since the last time I actually tried to solder MIDI connectors on points that small. And that's probably the real problem. There's nothing really wrong with soldering MIDI cables. It's just that I'm going blind, people. I'm just old. What can you do? Okay, so all this stuff is set up and working. I've got individual power leads from all the pedals to the Zuma, and then these 3 guys here, the 2 conduits and the Morningstar, are on 1 cable that's all grouped together with 4 taps, and then these guys are all on individual taps on O-hi. So at the moment, I've got 1 power cable, 1 guitar in, 1 mono cable into the deco, and stereo out to go into the recorder and record some stuff for you guys. So hopefully this has made some sense, and boy, you just can't beat drilling a hole in the back of a pedal board. That was not fun. So we've come to the end. Day has become night. I'm finished. You can see it's the time when you look way yellow and pale. Anyway, the board sounds really killer, man. I might leave this together a lot longer than I initially thought. I think if I had the dry board on the left, the 2 expression pedals in the middle, and the big board on the right, that might be all I need for a while. So it's pretty cool. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I hope that in there somewhere, all those years of playing 290 gigs a year, somewhere you got a nugget or 2 of some sort of wisdom that you can use for yourself. And if all we really accomplished together is just laughing because I had to bore a hole in the side of a submarine to finish the video, that's probably worth the time. So thanks very much for taking the time and hanging with me. My name is Sean Halley. I'll see you again. And I'm just going to noodle on some of the pedals. These are not curated sounds. I didn't make tones for this. These are wherever the knobs are, and I'm just going to play around with some combinations to see what I can get. But so far, man, it is working. So stick around. Thanks.